I've been studying tremors since 1972 when I was a graduate student at Indiana. I was a combined degree student. And that's kind of my introduction to neurology. After finishing medical school at Indiana and doing an internship here in Indianapolis, I went to Washington University in St. Louis. They have a lot of people interested in motor control and movement disorders. And I did a little primate research there with a very fine mentor named Tom Thatch. And then I went to Springfield in 1981 and joined a couple of guys to start a Department of Neurology in Springfield at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. So that's kind of my background, and I've been there in Springfield because I hate moving. I'm in the same home I moved into in 1981, and I really hate moving. So it's getting so that tremors the only thing I know a lot about. Since when I turned 67, I retired from the inpatient service and did strictly outpatient work in movement disorders, and I have a lot of interest in tremor. And my undergraduate was in engineering, and it turns out, tremor is an oscillation, and engineers love oscillations. They love studying oscillations, making oscillations. So this was a natural fit for me. So here's some people that had Parkinson's disease. In fact, every one of these people had Parkinson's disease or have Parkinson's disease, except Pat Buchanan. To my knowledge, he does not. You may remember Crossfire, the program on CNN where these two guys would debate some issue on the left and the right. It was one of my favorite programs, absolute favorite programs. And CNN was reluctant to even, at first they wouldn't even put the program in prime time. The idea came from Michael Kinsley, the guy here at the arrow. Well, you can't see the arrow. Let's see if this works. So this is Michael Kinsley, this is Pat Buchanan. Michael Kinsley developed Parkinson's disease, and it was no one knew. In fact, he attended an American Academy of Neurology meeting and hosted a forum, a little debate on some medical issue. I can't remember what it was. But I could tell right away that he had Parkinson's disease. And I went around and asked a bunch of my colleagues, people who had very high positions, including a past president of the American Academy of Neurology, you think Michael Kinsley has Parkinson's disease? Oh no, he's a lawyer from Harvard. He's just stoic. And
can you hold the mic just a little closer to the mouth?
Yeah. So you hear it now better?
I'm a retired speech therapist.
Okay. So anyway, people ask me all the time, what do you think Parkinson's disease is? Why is it so much more common? Well, we look for it. We do a better job of finding it, but we still not great because Michael Kinsley flew under the radar for a long time. In fact, only a few years later at the American Academy of Neurology, at the same public forum, he came out of the closet and he said, "How many of you knew I had Parkinson's disease?" And just a handful of people raised their hand. And it was kind of funny. He said, "Well, the rest of you better stay at the meeting longer." Yeah. This is Andy Grove. I actually had the opportunity to work with him, did work with him on a project. He developed Parkinson's. He's the first CEO of Intel. And he's the person that came up with the idea of Intel making all of the microprocessor units. You all know him. He's one of the few people on the slide that I haven't met. I would have loved to have met him. I know several doctors that had took care of him. He did not have Parkinson's disease from boxing. He actually boxed at least one match that I know of with Parkinson's disease that no one diagnosed. He was actually ordered to undergo an examination at the Mayo Clinic and was examined. And in the report, they noted that his one side was a little more rigid than the other, and they thought that was boxing. He did not have a tremor initially, but as you probably know, he'd had quite a tremor later on. And this is, remember Janet Reno? She had quite a bit of tremor. I met her in Florida because her doctor was a friend of mine, and Michael J. Fox happened to be there the same day. She's about 6'2". He's about 4 foot to her. I mean, he's a little guy. And when they stood together, and she was wearing some short heels, it was comical, really. It was like this was her little boy. I was surprised at her talk. I mean, she was really she's a smart woman, or was a smart woman. She did not tolerate her medicines. The medicines made her drowsy. And so she was fully symptomatic all the time. And she had quite a tremor. I think it was in her left arm. So the point here is that some people have a lot of tremor and some people don't. And the people that don't shake, they can fly under the radar, especially if they're older. So for years, I'm a big baseball fan. And for 2 years, and I'm a big Kirk Gibson fan, who was a left-hander, and always seemed to make the big play when it was needed. It was amazing. He just, if there was a home run needed, he got it. And after he retired as a player, he became a manager for the Arizona Diamondbacks. And for 2 years, when I saw him on TV go to the pitcher's mound or get in a fight with an umpire, I noticed that he had stoop posture, short steps, and didn't swing his left arm. Now I'm going to show you a classic video here. So this is a very famous play. This is the only play this is the only thing he did in that World Series, because he had torn ligaments in one knee, a torn hamstring. But they put him in as a pinch hitter. The Dodgers were down their last out. And he hit this home run and won, and the Dodgers went on to win the series. And it's somewhat ironic that in 2014, when he was the manager, Tony La Russa, who was then the manager of the Oakland A's and lost. Now watch this. Now we're going to see him as the manager. Watch his left arm. I love these umpire fights, you know. It's part of, if they ever go to artificial intelligence calling balls and strikes, it's going to wreck the game. You got to have this, man. Now watch Kirk Gibson's left arm. He's the guy in the red jacket. See that? No arm swing. Yeah. And watch his hand. See his hand like this? Classic posture. 2 years. 2 years this went on. And no diagnosis. I kept checking on the internet. Kirk Gibson, Parkinson. Nothing came up. Tony La Russa then was in the general manager's office, fired Kirk Gibson. Kirk Gibson went back to Detroit. Somebody saw him and made the diagnosis. So it just illustrates you don't have tremor, it flies under the radar. Now about 70% of Parkinson patients have obvious rest tremor. And just about virtually all Parkinson patients have a little action tremor during posture and movement, but that part is usually not disabling. It's when the rest tremor gets real bad, and then when you move, it re-emerges in posture and movement. And I'll show you that. It's a characteristic of Parkinson's disease. So why do I shake? So this is a side view of the brain. So this is the forehead, the back of the head. And this hot spot here, this is a DAT scan. How many people in this room have had a DAT scan? You've had a DAT scan? Yeah. So DAT scans We tend to do DAT scans when we're unsure of the diagnosis, or when we're sometimes when we're considering deep brain stimulation surgery, and I'll show you some examples of this. The issue is, why does loss of dopaminergic activity in the basal ganglia lead to tremor? Because not everybody has tremor. And the answer is, we know why it causes the oscillate, or we know how the oscillation is caused. What we don't know is why the degree of tremor varies so much from person to person. Can't answer that question. There's some people that just don't shake, and they have Parkinson's disease. So when you lose that dopaminergic activity in the basal ganglia, what happens is that the nerve cells in the globus pallidus, which is part of the basal ganglia, and the subthalamic nucleus, which is a common place where they put the deep brain stimulation electrodes, those neurons, those nerve cells, alter their typical behavior or pattern of firing and become abnormally oscillatory, and also abnormally synchronous. Okay? So there's less independence of activity. And so that's right here in blue. And then the basal ganglia then, by way of the thalamus, project back to the cortex. And that's the surface of our brain. What we think of is, this is what we think with, if you will. And then once it gets up here, then that oscillation spreads to this network shown here in orange. And you can see it's a pretty extensive network extending from the cerebral cortex, the surface of the brain, all the way down to the cerebellum, which is right in the top of your neck, base of your skull. And why this is so is unclear, but that network is conducive, prone to oscillation. And in fact, if you make artificial nerve networks with this structure, the one in orange, it will oscillate very strongly. And this network, not surprisingly, is involved in almost all kinds of tremor. Not all, but most all kinds of tremor, not just Parkinson. In most forms of tremor, we don't know where the oscillation originates. In Parkinson, we do. We know it starts here in the basal ganglia and spreads to this orange network. But in the other forms, you've probably heard of essential tremor, which is what Katharine Hepburn had. Those networks, we really don't know the origin of the oscillation. And I show here a picture of Rick Helmick, a young neurologist, movement disorder specialist from the Netherlands. He and his colleagues have sorted all this out with some elegant neuroimaging studies, and has really made a big contribution to this field. So we almost facetiously call this the tremor network. It's really not a tremor network. Every movement that you do, even if you fake a tremor, involves this network. So this network is there for a purpose. We just don't understand it very well. And why in the world this network would be made in such a way that it would promote oscillation when it occurs abnormally, not clear at all. So when you go to the doctor and you shake, then the question is, well, is this Parkinson's disease or is this some other form of tremor? So in the outpatient clinic, it's roughly a toss-up, 50-50 chance. If you come to my clinic with tremor, it's going to be about a 50-50 chance it's Parkinson's disease versus essential tremor. And I'll explain that in a moment. Or dystonic tremor. And I'll explain that in a moment. The key observation is whether you have tremor at rest, which means I'm trying to relax. I've been given every opportunity to relax here in the chair or here in the bed, but my hand or foot still shakes. It's not just when I try to write or eat or do something with my arm. It shakes just when I'm trying to relax and watch TV. And when you see this rest tremor, that's a clue. Because that narrows down the possibilities a great deal. Only the most advanced essential tremor patients have rest tremor. And rest tremor can also occur in patients with dystonic tremor, but the vast majority will have Parkinson disease. So this is a classic rest tremor in a lady who was actually referred to me for essential tremor. But you can see while she's sitting there talking, she has a tremor in her right hand. And you'll notice that when she rubs her thigh in a moment, the tremor transiently stops. And see that? That's the key. So the rest tremor will at least transiently stop when there's any kind of voluntary activation of the muscles. And so I knew a doctor that would carry marbles in his pocket, and he would keep his hand in his, when he was tremor acted up, he would get these marbles out and keep them in his hand and just manipulate them to suppress the tremor. There's all kinds of tricks. But then after the tremor transiently subsides, then it re-emerges. And this can be very disabling because, you know, you're trying to do some tedious task, and at first you're pretty calm, and then just when you're getting ready to really get into the meat of the task, you start violently shaking. You notice this lady didn't have facial masking. She didn't really look Parkinsonian. We call these patients tremor-dominant Parkinson patients. So the patients that shake a whole lot, we say they're tremor-dominant. Most patients shake, but they also have rigidity and bradykinesia. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we have the so-called akinetic rigid Parkinson patients that don't shake at all. They're just stiff and slow, like Michael Kinsley and like Kirk Gibson. So how do we treat this tremor? Well, levodopa is still the best drug. It's the best drug because it's most potent and it's most effective against the bradykinesia and rigidity. And usually, the tremor responds to levodopa. Unfortunately, and for reasons that are totally not understood, patients such as this lady can come in and be misdiagnosed because they didn't respond to levodopa. They have a classic Parkinson rest tremor. You show that to most of my residents, they're going to say this is Parkinson disease. But then uncertainty comes into the doctor's mind when the patient fails to respond to levodopa. We don't know why that happens. We just don't know. Some of you may be on a dopaminergic agonist like pramipexole or Repenerol, are the two most common ones. They're not nearly as potent as levodopa, but in the early controlled trials of these drugs, it was shown that they were more effective in the tremor. So here were patients that entered these trials that had disabling tremor despite optimal dosages of levodopa. They were put on pramipexole or Repenerol, and their tremor got a lot better. Totally unexpected. It shouldn't have been unexpected, though, because there was a famous researcher named Donald Calne at the NIH who was the first person to study bromocriptine. Remember, that was the first dopaminergic agonist. We don't use it anymore. But bromocriptine, as he experimented with higher and higher dosages, he noticed that these drugs seemed to have more of an effect on tremor than it did on bradykinesia and rigidity. And he facetiously called this a tremor drug, a Parkinson tremor drug. Amantadine, some of you may be on amantadine. We use it a lot for the dyskinesias, drug-induced dyskinesias, but it also is effective in tremor. Unfortunately, not enough to eliminate the need for surgery in many cases. Amantadine probably works in the subthalamic nucleus by blocking glutamate, which is where we put the electrode. One of the two places where we put the electrode for Parkinson's disease. And then propranolol, the old blood pressure medication, a beta blocker. A lot of people are on beta blockers for blood pressure and especially for heart. Cardiologists don't like propranolol because it gets into the nervous system and causes other issues, or can cause other issues, but it's by far the most effective beta blocker for tremor. And it helps Parkinson patients, especially those that have a lot of fluctuations in tremor due to whenever they get anxious or upset about something. If those drugs are inadequate, then you've got two options. You can do deep brain stimulation, where you got three options. You can live with the tremor, you got deep brain stimulation, or you got focused ultrasound. How many have heard of focused ultrasound? So has anybody had focused ultrasound? Yeah? No. So we'll talk about that. So here is a man who started having tremor at age 10, very strong family history, very strong family history. Now you say 10, that's way too early for Parkinson. But I have an autosomal recessive man, a man with autosomal recessive Parkinson disease who first noticed decreased arm swing when he was in track at age 10. And he had deep brain stimulation surgery at age 22. Yeah. So it happens. That's pretty rare. I mean, that's real rare. But this guy at age 10, so he has no rest tremor. As soon as he activates his arms, he has this postural tremor. Actually, when he got older, even though he had tremor for decades, when he got older, one of his doctors said, well, you got Parkinson's disease, put him on levodopa. He took levodopa for about 20 years. Did no good whatsoever. People often ask, well, does that hurt you? Well, actually, this has happened to a lot of people. They took levodopa for many years, even though they didn't have Parkinson's disease, and it used to be used for restless legs. So there were patients that took very high dosages of levodopa. And there have been autopsies done on patients that have taken, otherwise normal people, non-Parkinson patients who have taken levodopa, and they could find no evidence of any damage or harm from taking all that levodopa, really big dosages of levodopa for many years. So this guy has essential tremor. And what essential tremor, it's a syndrome. It's not a specific disease. Basically, these are people who have long-standing tremor in both upper limbs. They often have tremor in the head. They often have tremor in the voice. And that's it. And they do not have rest tremor unless it's very, very advanced. And then we call it essential tremor plus rest tremor because since it's a syndrome, it may evolve into something else. So sometimes these patients who develop rest tremor ultimately end up having Parkinson's disease or dystonic tremor. So here is an example. This 69-year-old woman had tremor for a long time, at least 10 years. She really wasn't sure how long she had the tremor, to be honest with you, because she had other family members with the tremor. And when this happens, you start shaking and you say, well, I'm like mom. Just like you turn gray, well, I'm like dad. So she came to me because the tremor had become disabling, especially in the right upper limb. And you see her right hand is shaking in a typical way. It looks, if you just showed me that hand, I'd say it's Parkinson's disease. Except she has no bradykinesia, no rigidity. And she has this head tremor. Head tremor can occur in Parkinson's disease, but it's unusual. And oftentimes you're not sure if it's really coming from the head and neck or if the arms are shaking so much, it's just shaking the head. Now this lady had a DAT scan. It was negative, and she went on to have deep brain stimulation. There's a bunch of patients in the research studies. You've probably heard about this before. Patients were enrolled in research studies with the diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, and about 10% of them had a normal DAT scan, even though experts, whatever that means, experts diagnosed them as Parkinson. We called those patients SWEDs, subjects without evidence of dopamine deficiency. And it's a fascinating group of patients. Many of those patients most of them never develop signs of Parkinsonism, but a significant percentage do, even though the DAT scan was initially normal. And so that's kind of a word of warning. When you have this tremor dominant syndrome, the DAT scan initially can be normal. And it makes a difference where we put the electrode. So it's not uncommon for me to see a patient who has bad tremor. They've got an abnormal DAT scan. They were told, or a normal DAT scan, so they were told, you don't have Parkinson's disease, you have essential tremor. And so then they were given drugs for essential tremor, which did not work. They may have even tried levodopa, which did not work. And then by the time I see them, they have obvious mild bradykinesia and rigidity, kind of like Kirk Gibson. And you just say, well, I know this has to be Parkinson's disease. I don't care what the DAT scan showed. Most of the time, just to be sure, we repeat the DAT scan before we do the surgery, and it's virtually always then abnormal. So there are a lot of false negatives in the tremor dominant group. And this is kind of what we see when we do this DAT scan. So this is a normal person, and it's a horizontal section through the brain, and this is the striatum on each side, and that's a normal scan. And that's also what you would see in essential tremor. In fact, this was from a patient with essential tremor. The early trials of the DAT scan compared essential tremor to Parkinson. And then you see that there's much more restricted area of hotness, of dopaminergic activity in this patient with early Parkinson's disease. Now, why does that make a difference? Because there's 3 spots where you can put the electrode in Parkinson's disease. You can put it in the thalamus, which is right here. So the thalamus is the site for any kind of tremor, virtually any kind of tremor except a couple of very rare forms. The problem with putting the electrode there, which is a very effective site for Parkinson tremor, is that it has no effect on bradykinesia and rigidity. And even if you have the tremor dominant phenotype, eventually you're going to get rigidity and bradykinesia. And so if we put the electrode in the thalamus, then later on, when you get the rigidity and bradykinesia, I can't treat that by adjusting the electrode. The other 2 sites are the globus pallidus interna and the subthalamic nucleus, which connect with each other, and that's where the oscillation is believed to originate, in that network connecting the subthalamic nucleus and the globus pallidus interna. So the difference there is that if I put the electrode in the globus pallidus interna, it usually does not reduce my medication requirements. In the subthalamic nucleus, there's almost always a reduction in medication requirements. And I've done surgery on some Parkinson patients that could not tolerate any medicine, so medicine wasn't an option, and we had to do the subthalamic nucleus. So this is deep brain stimulation. Now they're are multiple companies that make the device and the electrodes. The original was Medtronic. And one of my fraternity brothers at Purdue, Cliff Owens, the guy wearing the white shirt, he was the vice president at Medtronic that was in charge of the development of deep brain stimulation. And to show you how we get together, how often we get together, I didn't know this for probably 20 years. I ran into him at a meeting. I said, Cliff, what are you doing here? And he said, I organized this meeting. It's kind of embarrassing, really. We doctors have our head in the sand sometimes, I tell you. Okay, so here's one of these tremor dominant patients. Now, he's already had, he came to me for this tremor in his left hand. And he had had it for a few years. He wasn't 65 yet, and he wanted to wait until he went on Medicare so he would be protected from the high prices. His only complaint was tremor. He had no rigidity, no bradykinesia, no medication helped at all. The only other thing in his medical history is he smoked too much. Liked to play golf. He was a retired engineer, kind of stubborn. Very nice guy. And you can see it's primarily on the left side, but when he moves, see how it stops? And that's why in a lot of patients they can deal with the tremor because it's suppressed whenever there's voluntary movement. You see his gait's very brisk. You watch this guy walk. You say, well, what's wrong with that gait? But he's a little stooped, a little bent forward, and doesn't swing that left arm very well. So he had surgery. It was placed in the subthalamic nucleus, way down here. Subthalamic nucleus is about as big as a lima bean, a nice sized lima bean. So it's not big. He did very well after surgery, totally stopped the tremor, better movement in the left upper limb. He's really happy with the left upper limb. He's showing off here. But notice now he's got tremor in the right hand. And that's how this works. You think, well, it's just going to be limited to the left, but now he's got it in the right. And he went on to have bilateral surgery. So what are the problems with bilateral surgery? Bilateral surgery is more likely to cause impairment of speech and balance. Whenever you monkey with both sides of the brain, you're more likely to have problems with speech and balance. Doesn't matter what you do to both sides of the brain. It could be trauma, it could be some kind of neurodegeneration, it could be strokes. Typically, those patients at the very least will have problems with speech and balance. Okay, so a lot of people don't like the idea of having a hole drilled here and being awake and having that electrode, which is not, it's about electrode diameter, it's about the size of a fat mechanical pencil lead. I used to have an electrode that I carried with me, but I've lost it. But they're not big. But you got to remember, these structures aren't big. So the target, the electrode diameter is 1.2 millimeters. So a fat pencil lead is about a millimeter, right? And these targets are 3 millimeters. Okay? So you don't have to be off much. But thanks to stereotactic surgery and the fact that these targets are deep in the middle of the brain, they're actually easier to hit precisely than you would think. And most good surgeons will hit the target the first time about 50% of the time or more. And now some patients, well, for some time, some patients have had the surgery under general anesthesia. So there was no microelectrode recording confirmation of the target. They went purely on the coordinates. And in fact, one of my patients, a veteran who had to have the surgery in Indianapolis to get it paid for by the VA, He had it done at IU. I don't know who the surgeon was, but they did it under general anesthesia, and he's had the best result of probably any patient that I've ever had. It's just amazing. He comes back to see me once a year. I hardly ever have to make any adjustments. Really a good job. With focused ultrasound, what you do is you deliver energy through the skull, so there's no hole, and this ultrasound energy, is focused at one point, the same points that we use for the electrode, the same targets, and then we deliver enough energy to burn the spot. So initially, there's no way to confirm the location by electrode recording, because that would require a hole in the skull and an electrode in there. The way we confirm it is that this is done in an MR scanner, and we deliver just enough energy to heat that spot just enough to make it glow in the scanner. And so they do a quick scan, and they say, yep, it's in the right spot, and then they deliver more energy until the tremor stops. So that's focused ultrasound. And just like deep brain stimulation, there are 3 possible targets. Here's the target in the thalamus. And you can see that this is with sham. So it's easy to do sham surgery when you're not drilling holes. This is sham, so it's just fake. They put them in the scanner and they didn't do anything to them except make them sit in the scanner for a few hours. And then this is with the lesion. And there's a big reduction. This amounts to at least an 80% reduction in tremor. That's what most patients experience, 80%. So if I'm like this and you reduce it by 80%, I'm going to be a really happy camper. Yeah. If I'm like this, and there are people like this, and you reduce it by 80%, now I'm like this, and I might still be handicapped by the tremor. That's the problem. And then here's the results from subthalamotomy, from heating up the subthalamic nucleus, which is kind of my favorite target for Parkinson's disease because it reduces medication requirements. And here's the tremor score before and after, and that's a big reduction. Yeah. So whenever you get something down to 1, a score of 1, you've got a happy camper, let me tell you. Because a score of 1 is a barely visible tremor. With essential tremor and dystonic tremor, do y'all know what dystonia? Have you heard of dystonia? So dystonia is an abnormal contraction that contorts some part of the body. So it can contort the face, and we call this blepharospasm. People can't keep their eyes open. A very common form is cervical dystonia, where the head's turning like this. One of my medical school classmates developed cervical dystonia while he was studying for his prelims. He was an MD PhD student. His head started doing this. Can affect the whole body. But these patients, especially the ones with cervical dystonia and vocal dystonia, strain, avoid. Those patients commonly have tremor elsewhere in the body. And those patients and the essential tremor patients just get steadily worse generally, the tremor at least. With Parkinson's disease, it's a little bit different. For about the first 10 years, the tremor gets worse, but then it kind of plateaus, and it might even get better later on. So generally, if the surgery is successful, and that's usually done about at this point in the course of the disease, you've pretty much knocked out the tremor. It's not going to be a problem like with programming. You're going to be happy for a long time. What about these devices? See, I've heard about all these devices. And full disclosure, I've consulted with most of these companies. The one that's best known is Calitrio. Calitrio is a wrist device that delivers electrical activity to 2 of the nerves in the wrist. and that's shown right here. And the theory is that by stimulating the nerves, sending sensory signals back to the thalamus, that you disrupt the oscillation in that tremor circuit. Anybody have Calitrio? Yeah, it's FDA cleared. It is not FDA approved for efficacy. There's a big difference. What does FDA cleared mean? FDA cleared means the FDA says, well, this device is enough like other devices that are on the market that we know it's safe. So if you want to sell it, it's like the herbal medicines on the radio when they say, oh, take this, it's going to make you more beautiful, it's going to make you smarter, it's going to get rid of your gray hair and your wrinkles. And then they say real fast, but this drug is not FDA approved to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness. Well, then why am I going to be taking it, you know? Yeah. So the other device is, we call these electrical or functional electrical stimulation. Basically what this does is there's some contraption that you wear on the arm, and then there are electrodes that are placed strategically on muscles in your arm, and then the device records the tremor and delivers precisely electrical stimuli to the muscles at the right time to counteract the tremor. But you can imagine, you know, you've got something stimulating your arm all the time, and you got to get the electrodes on the right location, da-di-da-di-da. This really hasn't caught on, to be honest with you. I don't know. I've never met a person that has used one of these devices outside of a study. There's these spoons. Anybody try these spoons? Yeah, most Parkinson patients don't need them because when they get some food and try to bring it to their mouth, at least for a short period of time, the tremor is suppressed. But then if they hold it there for very long, they're going to make a big mess. So these spoons have a little motion sensor in them and a motor. And what it does is it senses the tremor and then makes a spoon move in the opposite direction, kind of to cancel out the tremor. And I was really impressed the first time I tried this. But it takes some getting used to. And I don't have any Parkinson patients that have ever used it. I have a lot of patients with dystonic tremor and essential tremor that use it. So I'm not surprised no one in the room has used this. My device no longer works because I used to loan it out to people to try, and somebody put it through the dishwasher. Yeah. So here, it was $300 down the drain. It's sold on Amazon now. I actually think Amazon bought the company. They got a lot of money, so they can buy a company like this. So there's these other devices that are worn either at the wrist or the forearm. And these are prosthetic devices that are either active or passive. The passive ones have basically a little shock absorber. So, if your shocks are bad, you go over a speed bump, like this, right? Get new shocks, you go over a speed bump, it's like this. You don't have this sustained oscillation. And that's what this shock absorber on the wrist does. And it's just a matter of how much of your tremor is coming from the wrist, because if it's coming from the fingers, or if it's coming from the elbow, or if it's coming from the shoulder, and oftentimes it is, if it's bad, it does no good whatsoever. And that's the limitation of these devices. Here's a device that's actually worn on the forearm, and it can also be worn on the hand. It senses the tremor and then generates a counteracting force to basically cancel out the tremor. And once again, it really depends on where the tremor is coming from, which joint or joints are most involved, whether this is going to be effective at all. And as you might imagine, we engineers can we'll stop that tremor no matter what, you know. So, you know, you give me your arm, we'll find some devices to slap on there, and you'll be looking like RoboCop pretty soon, right? But nobody's going to wear one of these. This was actually a hydraulic device, believe it or not. So, my advice to everyone is if you try one of these devices, make sure there's a return policy. And there is for Calitrio. Yep. Well, Medicare won't pay for it anymore. Medicare won't pay for any of these devices. So it's no longer an issue. For a while they were. If the insurance or Medicare pays for it, they won't give back your money if you say it doesn't work. But if you buy it out of pocket, at least Calitrio has a return policy. I think they give you a month or two to figure out whether it works. So in summary, what can be done? I told you about the drugs. The dopamine agonists are good. My mother, that was the only drug that helped her was pramipexole. 6 months later, I went to see her, and she had ankles that like this instead of like this. She was 110 pounds, 5'2". And she was a blimp. And why this edema develops after a while, no one knows, not even the company. It can also cause hallucinations in Parkinson patients. So you got to be careful using these drugs in older people. And then the surgery, the ultrasound and deep brain stimulation. Ultrasound is still can't be done on both sides. We don't know that it can be done safely. Even deep brain stimulation has issues when it's done on both sides. So you have to be prepared for some speech and balance difficulties. But there are trials underway looking at bilateral focused ultrasound, and it may turn out that it's as safe as doing the electrodes. The difference is that you can't go back. Once you burn a part of the brain and destroy it, there's no going back. If you burn a part of the brain and later on it doesn't work quite so well, some of those patients have gone on to have deep brain stimulation, so that's an option. And so that's it. I'll be glad to answer any questions. Yep.
So you talked about the abnormal and synchronous firing. Have you done any research into Dr. Peter Toss and the gloves that are being researched at Stanford right now with the asynchronous neuronal pathway and the vibration pattern on the fingertips being different?
Oh, yeah, the vibration in the fingertips.
Yes.
So is there someone doing that in Indianapolis?
Well, I made a buzzword.
You made a what?
I made a simulation that I'm using that I don't have access. The gloves are not fully approved yet.
Right. Yeah, whenever I read these news articles about these devices, and I think this was a small study done at Stanford, I always go to clinicaltrials.gov. You know this website, clinicaltrials, all one word, .gov, is a government website that lists all the ongoing trials in Parkinson's disease. So all you have to do is put in Parkinson's disease in the search window, and it'll show you all the trials. I couldn't find a trial for this.
He just got patent approval to restart trials, so I'm thinking this will start soon.
Okay.
Trials in Florida.
So I don't know anything about this glove. There is a group in Boston, and full disclosure, I've been collaborating with them. They're delivering vibration to the wrist. It really has to be done in a controlled way. There's a big placebo effect in Parkinson's disease. So you remember that one slide that for this focused ultrasound thalamotomy, there was a sizable placebo effect. And why this is, it's unclear. And also the tremor is very variable. It fluctuates a lot. If we get upset, it's worse or better. So generally getting upset makes gait better. You're angry or you're excited and you jump right out of the chair and dart across the room to punch somebody out or argue with them, But the tremor gets worse. So that's kind of how it works. I hope it works, the glove. The idea, presumably, is that the vibration stimulates the sensory receptors, vibration receptors, the Pacini and corpuscles in the skin, and that this nerve activity goes back and disrupts the tremor oscillation. That tremor oscillation is very strong. It's incredible how strong these tremor oscillations are. Extraordinarily strong. And it's really hard for me to conceive of much success from peripheral stimulation. But maybe it'll work.
Any other is this on?
Any other questions?
You're right.
We hear a lot about AI. Does AI have anything to offer in some of these problems?
So AI, artificial intelligence, I think will be helpful for diagnosis. But I've been using ChatGPT. It's very good for scientific questions. And I was arguing with my brother-in-law about artificial. He's very leery of it. I applied for a visa to Australia on the internet, and literally within 5 minutes I got it. And I'm sure that was all done by AI. I scanned in my passport, photograph, personal information, bingo. When I got a visa to China 20 some odd years ago, I had to spend a whole day in Chicago. Yeah. So it's just, I think ChatGPT will be very helpful in the future in aiding in the diagnosis, yeah. You have a question?
Have you seen in your history an escalation of patients that have had like a major surgery? So I know this is kind of like a broad question, but patients who had like a major surgery, has it escalated the diagnosis or the onset of Parkinson's? I don't know if that's a...
Yeah, so the question is, can some stressful event like surgery, a medical or trauma, or maybe a divorce, something like this, can seem to make it worse, can seem to accelerate, and why? That's the question, okay? So a very common scenario is that mom or dad was, quote, normal, had to go in the hospital for appendicitis or gallbladder, and that night, after a few doses of various medications, mom or dad is biting the nurses, kicking, yelling, hallucinating. And so patients with Parkinson's disease, especially those that have cognitive issues, are very prone to delirium. And if the delirium lasts for very long, then it seems that it is very difficult for there to be full recovery. And why? I've had patients, it's like post-COVID syndrome. Well, post-delirium syndrome is a real deal. I had a patient who was delirious for over a month, and it took a long time for him to get back to normal, able to go home, but he eventually was able to go home. But he was never the same after that. And why this is, I don't know. Depression can do the same thing. So it can be a psychological stress. I had a guy with a cancer phobia, and he overheard the doctor saying, could that be cancer, when they were doing some kind of bladder scan? And he just went into atonic mute state. He was just rigid and laid in bed for a month. He was literally catatonic. And the psychiatrist couldn't believe that this was psychiatric. And one day I just took him by the hand. I said, we're going to get out of this bed or you're going to die. And I forced him to walk up and down the halls and do various things. He eventually left on the same dose of medicine he came in on. So it doesn't make sense. We really can't understand why these things happen. But illnesses have much greater impact on Parkinson patients, especially those with cognitive issues.
And so why was the second one was
Why?
just, yeah, you had mentioned.
Why we don't know.
Right.
I'm gonna be only 3 acceptable answers in medicine are yes, no, I don't know, and I don't know. I could give you all kinds of hypotheses, but I really don't know.
Do you think that like the anesthesia portion of that?
Well,
plays a factor
it tips them
there?
into this delirium,
Okay.
okay? And once they get into the delirium, there's one hypothesis is that you've got a lot of nerve cells. You would think because they're kind of less, well, sometimes they're more active. They're hitting and thrashing around and not sleeping. But there's nerve cells doing things that they don't normally do. And it's believed that that can produce damage, that nerve cells can kind of burn themselves out, kind of like driving with the parking brake on. And that's the main theory. It also happens in peripheral nervous system. A friend of mine with Parkinson's disease had surgery on his neck and then ended up in ICU with a bad pneumonia. And he's a big karate black belt, and he's now very weak. So he developed a rare neuromuscular syndrome that occurs in patients that are infected and typically on a ventilator. So, and why exactly this happens is not clear.
In the interest of time, I want to take, is there any one additional question?
You want one?
I've been recently diagnosed now with essential tremor, and I had started with being diagnosed with Parkinson's.
Yeah.
Now, I was happy thinking on essential tremor versus Parkinson's. Now you're kind of, what you're saying is, oh no, I should stay with Parkinson's. But I thought Parkinson's was more, long-term, you'd have mental issues and stuff. We dealt with essential tremor.
Yeah, from the stand, essential tremor is not a benign illness.
Oh no.
But it only causes you to shake. So that's the advantage of essential tremor. And I always every time I give a tremor talk, either to an essential tremor group or to a Parkinson group, there's always one person or more like you that was diagnosed the other way. And it's a 50-50 chance in my clinic that the referring diagnosis is wrong, 50-50. So, yeah. So it's hard to tell sometimes. But your voice isn't anything like a Parkinson voice.
Well,
Yeah.
I work on it.
Yeah.
Yes, it was. I've been through LSVT loud.
Yeah.
I've been
Yeah, that
through
helps.
I do it every day. Yes.
Yeah. You had one question, sir?
Well, just a general question. Are Parkinson's patients at increased risk if they have a major surgery with the anesthesia of having some additional problems?
They're at increased risk. The question is, if I'm Parkinson and I have some comorbid illness that requires surgery, or am I at increased risk? And the answer is yes. So Parkinson patients are at increased risk of delirium, and you want to keep the narcotics to a bare minimum, use them only if necessary. You want to ambulate as fast as possible, and you want to make sure that you have good sleep hygiene while you're in the hospital. So, I used to catch my nurses all the time, waking my patients up in the middle of the night and asking them who the president is, and I don't really care, I want them to sleep. So I used to have to write orders, do not wake the patient up at night. Yeah. It's
Thank
really
you.
important. Yep.
Thank you.
All right, guys. So we are going to just kind of switch gears totally and get you guys moving a little bit, stretching out a little bit, all the things that are good for Parkinson's. So this is interactive. I want you to do the things. I'll do them with you. We're all going to get up and move a little bit, and I'm just going to talk a little bit at the beginning about the effects of exercise, and then we're all going to stand up and we're all going to be moving. We'll spread out. It'll be something everyone can do. So we will get moving here. So just a little bit about myself. I'm Allison. I have my doctoral degree in physical therapy. I'm a certified brain injury specialist, and then my additional training is all in LSVT big for Parkinson's. I won't go into that too much, but if you have any questions about it, I'll be in the back and you can talk about it. It's a specific program for Parkinson's disease involving exercise. So most of the patients I see have something going on with their brain, specifically Parkinson's is my specialty area. So everything I'm going to do with you guys today is going to be specifically for the things that affect Parkinson's. We're going to try to reverse those things. So feel free also, since we're going to be getting up at any point, feel free to stand up at any point too. All right, so like Wendy said, I have a sweet little baby girl. This is Hadley in that corner. Just a month ago, I had her. She's very sweet. She's with my husband at home right now. That's us in the middle there. So we do own a gym on the south side. We're in Greenwood. And we have a cash-based PT clinic within the gym. So I do a lot of Parkinson's classes at the gym, and then we do a lot of just other gym classes for different diagnoses. Parkinson's is my specialty area, so that's where I do the most of our stuff. And then Milo, top right-hand corner, that's our dog, and he comes to all the Parkinson's classes. He's kind of our cheerleader. So he loves people and loves the gym. Golden Retriever. Yep, he's a sweetheart. And I'm sure Hadley will be there soon too. All right, so a little bit just about LSVT big and loud that you mentioned earlier. You mentioned loud. So with Parkinson's, as the doc was just saying, that part of the brain, that basal ganglia, wants you to be small and it wants you to be really quiet. So it targets those areas. What we do with big and loud is we make you big and then we make you loud. So everything we do with the program is about emphasizing big posture, big movements, and loud voice. That way we can offset those things in Parkinson's that are attacked. So the program itself, if you do the specific program, it's 4 weeks, it's 4 times a week for big and loud. Or you can, if you see a therapist who's certified in that, we just apply those pieces to the therapy. So there's kind of 2 ways you can do it, but that's LSVT big and then LSVT loud. So with, like I was saying, the target of that, with all the exercise you should be doing, if you're seeing a PT, if you're seeing a personal trainer, if you're just doing things on your own, the target of your exercise should be to make all your movements bigger and all your enunciation louder. So I'm going to have you guys practicing that a little bit. The big thing with Parkinson's, when we go through these things, when I say bigger, we might see, oh, okay, I'm going to move my arm like that. But when I say big, I mean big. So we want to really emphasize the motions and make it exaggerated. That way that part in the brain can be triggered, that dopamine can increase. So before we go any further, I want you all to just sit up really tall, and you can see the whole room changed, right? So we know that we were all like this, right? So we're getting bigger, taller, chest up. Squeeze those shoulder blades back and just try to maintain that way. Keep talking here, and then we'll keep adding more. This is the first big cue you always want to start your exercises with. Get that posture really big. And then I'll have you start counting, but a good thing to do when you're doing exercises is count and count loud. So again, usually when I have people start that, they're like 1, 2, 3. We want to make it really exaggerated because that's how we get the dopamine to kick in. So this is just an example. I'm going to take you guys through a couple specific exercises, but this is what LSVT big looks like. So these are types of exercises we do. And one of the first things I usually hear is, oh, I feel like I look silly, or that looks, silly or small, or Exaggerated, that's the word I'm looking for. But these things are specifically geared towards all the things Parkinson's hits on, and we want to reverse that. So anytime we can do motions that involve twisting, turning, big posture, big stepping, big hand movements, those are things that are going to make a huge difference for what we're doing. So this is what, I'm not going to take you through all of these. I'm going to take you through some of them, and we're just going to stretch out a little bit since we don't have a ton of room. But go ahead, let's spread out a little bit. You can go ahead and move your seats back from the table. Just give yourself some room. So you want room so you can stand up and be comfortable. And then let's go ahead and stand up. Anyone who can stand up, I'd like you to stand up. We'll start moving a little bit, getting everything moving. I'm just going to leave this on the screen. This is my contact information for Renewal and Grateful Gains. So Renewal is my physical therapy clinic. Grateful Gains is our gym. It has our email on there. Call, text that number there if you have any questions specifically about anything Parkinson's related. Even if you're just like, am I doing the right things? Just feel free to contact me. Or if you're interested in the classes, we're down in Greenwood. I'll be in the back again in that back corner if you have any questions afterwards. But right now we're just going to be moving around a little bit. So let's go ahead. We're going to just start with big posture standing. So I want you to, jut your chest out, And I want you to squeeze your shoulder blades together, and you're already going to start feeling better because this is the position we should be in, but we're never in that. And then I'm going to have you guys go ear to ear. We're going to go back and forth with our neck. Kind of roll it out. If something feels tight, you're going to stay there and hold on to it. So then we're going to add in the circles. I'm going to find a tight spot, and then I'm going to kind of lean into it. And while we're doing this, try to relax your shoulders down. So your neck should be moving back and forth, but your shoulders should be relaxing down. Yeah. Yeah. So we have talked, she just asked if for anyone who doesn't live in Greenwood, do we offer Zoom classes? Yeah, we do. So there's a virtual option, and yeah, so just let me know about that. All right, keep going, couple more. Still neck rolls all the way around. Perfect. Okay, we're gonna go down to our shoulders. So looking straight forward, we're gonna squeeze our shoulder blades together really, really, really tight, and then relaxing forward. Really, really, really tight, relaxing forward. Perfect, keep doing those, just getting everything moving. And then we're gonna add the big component here. So big arms, perfect. You'll hit your neighbor, and that's okay because we're all gonna hit our neighbors. There we go, bring it in, out and then in. So you're gonna keep going, both arms out, both arms in. And then I'm going to cue all of you. I want bigger hands. So your hands are all of you are kind of making small hands. I want big hands, big happy hands as you're doing that. That helps with those tremors in your hand. It helps stretch out that area. It's all right if you hit your neighbor. We're all doing it. We're all hitting our neighbors, and it's totally fine. There you go. Perfect. All right, relax down. We're going to do flicks with our hands now. So this is the motion. So I want to hear the flick as you're doing that. So you should hear that weird flicking noise that you're making with your fingers. You're doing both hands at the same time, and you're making your hand as big as you can at the end of the flick. So this helps a lot with the tremors, specifically in the fingers. And this helps, like, if you're going to button up your shirt and you're like, my tremor's so bad right now, this helps kind of reset the hands. So we're going to count now, and I want you all to be really loud because that's important for dopamine, right? So I'm going to start with 1, and we'll keep going. So we're going to all count out loud. So we'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, stop. Good job. That was perfect. You guys knew the drill. All right, we're going to do a rotation piece now. So big hand. Let's all do right hand. So right hand big out to the side, and I call them swooshies. So we're going to do a big swoosh across the body. And as you do that, your palm's going to the ceiling. It's okay if you hit somebody, just spread out. We're all doing the same thing. So big hand, swish across the body to the ceiling. Yep. So here, swish across the body. You just want to make sure you're going across the body. Some people will be kind of like, just not across the body. Just make sure you're going across the body and your palm's going towards the ceiling. Some of you, your hands got small when we did this, so we're going to make the hands bigger, right? There we go. Perfect. And you should feel that rotation in your spine as you're doing it. We're going to go big rotation. Good, you guys look good. All right, we're gonna switch sides. So big hand on the outside, left hand, swish. Perfect. Keep going. You guys look good. So all these motions here, these are all things that you should be doing on a regular basis because this is gonna be what offsets those Parkinson's symptoms. And it doesn't have to be perfect. You just have to be generally doing the right thing and making it as big as possible. One more time on this side. Relax. Good. Let's check in with our posture. So some of you got down a little bit, right? So let's get up again. Yep. Oh, that was better. You can always tell by the room, like when we first did it, everyone was like, whoa. Yeah. That time I was like, okay, that was a little better. All right. So we're going to get, what I want you to do this time as we're going through this next one, a big part of Parkinson's too is that facial masking, right? So a funny thing to do with these is ha ha ha, let's just laugh. Ready? Everyone in the room, ha 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 ha. Right? And it's contagious, right? So then everyone immediately, right? Your face looks so much better. Any type of masking you have, it just kind of reduces it. So just anytime you can do that. I'll cue it here in a minute. But as we're going through these, anytime you can just exaggerate a smile or laugh or communicate with somebody while you're doing it, it's going to emphasize those dopamine receptors in the brain. So again, big posture. This time we're going to step out. And I want to hear your foot hit the floor and then step in. So out and then in. Good. And I want to hear you stomping the floor as you step out. Yep. And then bring it in. Good. Keep going. You can go at your speed together all on the same side. So keep going. Big arms. Stepping in, stepping out. Beautiful. Okay, we're going to start counting now. Ready? Everyone. 1, 2. Good. Louder. 3. Beautiful. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oh, and that was so fun and great. We're going to laugh. Oh my gosh, that was great. So much fun. Okay. All right, same thing, the other leg. So we're going to do the other leg stepping forward. So arms are the same. Ready? So we're going to step together. There you go. So same thing. Out. And we're just doing the other leg. Same thing, other leg. Good. All right, we're going to start counting. Ready? 1. Louder. 2. Good. 3. 4. 5. We're getting a little quiet. Let's get loud. 6. Thank you. 7. 8. 9. 10. Oh, that was great. Good job, guys. That's awesome. All right, we're going to do one last one. We're going to do a sit-to-stand variation. So everyone's going to sit down, but get your chair in a position where you can stand up and do an exercise. So kind of spread your chair out a little bit. So sit-to-stands are some of the big ones. We do a bazillion of these. Helps the hip muscles, helps that posture as well. All right, now that everyone's getting down, sitting, posture. Yep, there you go. Beautiful. So as we're doing this, when you stand up, you are going to, let me grab this chair real quick. We are going to lean forward. So big hands, good posture. Lean forward towards the floor. And when we stand up, we're going to make a big T with our arms. So lean forward towards the floor. You might hit your neighbor, and that's fine because we're all doing the same thing. So lean forward, stand up, lean forward, sit down. Go at your own speed. This is just what it should look like. And keep going. Keep going. Everyone should at least try this. This is a really important one. There you go. Beautiful. Bigger hands for all of you. Keep going. About 5 more. 5 more wherever you're at. That's number 1. Here's number 2. And 3. Good. 2 more. 4. And 5. Good. Relax. Sit down. Good job. Woo! Got your heart rate up. Feeling good. So all of that kind of resets the system, increases the dopamine in your brain naturally, and it should make you feel better after all that. I mean, it's not, no one wants to exercise, but once you do and do those things that target the dopamine centers in the brain, that's all going to be super helpful. All right, guys, that was awesome. Thank you for participating. I'm going to be in the back corner. Feel free to grab me. Feel free to grab me if you have any questions. Otherwise, I think we got somebody else announcing. Is that you? Are you announcing something? Yep, go ahead.
Marion County prosecutor and has had a history of PD, and I want to say he is one of Indiana's most notable Parkinsonians. And he's going to speak, he's going to share my life and journey with PD. Oh, the gauntlet. I'm glad you're shorter.
That's one reason to be glad.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
I like this organization. They take long breaks. I like working in places like that. They're long breaks. Well, it's great to be with you. I've been working all morning.
Could I put this on you?
Yeah, please.
I think it's put it on you.
I assume it's a microphone, not a
It's
microphone, not a detonator.
For the,
Okay, no, right.
where do you get this paranoia? You'd think you're a prosecutor.
Yeah. I don't believe anything that's beyond a reasonable doubt. You know, it's really hard to get. Did you ever think about, by the way, how hard it is to convince 12 people of anything, even in your house, what to be for dinner that night?
I've got to invite you to a PAACI board meeting.
Yeah, that's really hard to do. People don't give us enough credit, former prosecutors anyway. I've been jotting down things all an hour and a half I've been here, and I've been writing things down, and I have everything written down about my whole life right here. It's all here, every little thing. You would hate me. You'd hate me by the time I finished it. And you may hate me still, you know. But you know, I'll go ahead, I'll charge into this. And I've been asked to speak today about kind of my path, my journey with Parkinson's. And it's going to blow up, I think. There's something beeping. I hope it's okay. Anyway, can you all hear me all right? Yes. Really? Okay. Okay. So it really is a journey with Parkinson's. It has lasted now 24 years. I've had since my diagnosis of Parkinson's. And one of the first groups I went to attend meetings was this one. And I think you were there. That's Deck, right? Yes. He was there. That guy, I mean, let's give him a hand right now for longevity. All right. That's very admirable, and thank you. Half of the community. Let's see, just general roundup of things I noticed this morning we can be proud of and not so proud of. I saw an article on the web that said that Indiana had the distinction of having the worst college in the world, in the United States, in the state of Indiana. And as usual with the web, I couldn't figure out what the answer was. So you probably want to know which is the worst college. Is your kid, your grandkid going to it right now? But it's not, they didn't say the answer. I could find it. But it was quite a distinction. I also note some news items that are important, like, does anybody know what the national holiday is today? You talked about this already? What is the national holiday that's being celebrated today? I'm sorry, did I screw this up?
No, you didn't. But
Get your hands off of it, right?
all kinds of things going on behind you. that you probably don't need. So
Okay.
that's all.
All right. I'm ready. All right. So, does anybody know what nationally recognized holiday it is today? It is Back to the Future Day. Yeah. And that film came out in 1985, this day, in October 21st, 1985 was the day. And I remember I read the first book that Fox came out with of his autobiography. I've read 3 of his books now, but in that book he admitted that he was flying high with this movie that was just a uproar of excitement about this movie, and he sat next to Princess Diana during the premiere of that movie, the first time it was ever previewed, and she really liked it, but he couldn't stand it because he had to go to the bathroom the whole time. And they put him in the middle of the row, and he's got Lady Princess Diana next to him. So he was suffering that whole time. And that's the way life is, isn't it? There's always something real, like Parkinson's for that matter, that you have to care about it, but you can't let it dominate you. And you can't let it define you. Let's see. This is just some general things I just want to get warmed up with. Oh yeah, this building used to be the Knights of Columbus, and many, many great events were held here. And every election day, guys like me, at the time I was a politician running for office, were standing on that bit of sidewalk out there, because there were 6 polling places in this joint. 6 of them in one place. And we all were trying to discover the votes. And I ran in 1994 against Jeff Modisette. And we stood right on that sidewalk. It was like a shootout at the OK Corral. They were both out there. Someone comes by, he says, vote for me. He'll vote for me. It was like, all right, this town isn't big enough for the both of us. And as it turned out, that was true. But they had one little guy that they could find a spot for. It was me. Yeah. All right, so I thought it was kind of neat. I wanted to talk about, seriously somewhat now, about my path, which is no more unique than anybody's here or less unique. And there's something to be learned from every one of these stories that we can tell. I'll tell you some of the main things. I've never really told these things to a crowd. I really haven't, but I thought I wanted to be real with you. And I'll tell you, I was a kid. I grew up in Chicago, just across the line in Lincolnwood, Illinois. And I was a pretty lonely kid, really I was. I just wasn't that gregarious or anything. I was just very focused on wanting to live somewhere else than Lincolnwood, Illinois. I looked around Lincolnwood, Illinois, and there was nothing about it that suggested any character, place, history, anything at all. Until one day, I riding the bus to school. This guy drove our bus for like 8 years of my life every morning. And he always had the reports from the stockyards. When I'd be going to the school, I'd be thinking, in my foggy mind at that time, I think I was going to stockyards too. But they'd say, 5,000 hogs in Moline, East Dubuque, 4,000 hogs, 2,700 hogs, and so it'd go like that. And I felt I was next. But anyway, that was the way it was until I started to build something that looked really exotic. For once, I would have a place with something unusual about it. It seemed to be a ship that was being built right there in the middle of our neighborhood. This was exciting to me. Explorers were high on my list of things that I cared about. And sure, this guy's name was, whoever they were building, I quickly realized his name was Long John Silver. That they built Long John Silver's restaurant, the first one I'd ever seen, 3 blocks from my house, with on a fake pier and big ropes tied to nothing at all. So it didn't do it for me. But I began to care about the world a lot and wanted to be someplace else. So I did some traveling with my parents, and then I liked Latin America. I was very interested in it and started to listen to radio stations from Latin America and indeed from around the world. I remember listening to Radio Moscow, and that was interesting because the guy that hosted Radio Moscow in English was a Russian who had a beautiful English American accent. But he was a commie, of course, just like everybody who played soccer in my day was a commie. Anyway, so we thought, that was our view. But anyway, this guy ended up defecting to the United States many years later, and he mentioned my name on the air because I had sent a note. I sent a note to, you're not going to believe this. I sent notes to the stations to get verification that I received them. And I got one from Radio Moscow and had a page of script from the tape from the air, the airwaves, that this guy, this announcer, who later became famous in the United States, was asking my question. And my question was this. I understand that the Soviet Union has lots of different republics in it. One of, like, the biggest one is supposed to be the Ukraine. I said, is the Ukraine someplace that's independent as a state? Or you guys basically rule it? I asked that question. And he answered it on the air. Guess what the answer was? Oh, they do whatever they want. They can tap dance on the premier's desk. But no, they didn't say that. But that's the kind of answer I got. But as time went on, I became very involved in international relations and trying to keep up with them. And I was so into it that I became the editor of the Latin American section of the North American Shortwave Association. It was my job to tell people how to keep track of what little stations all around the world were on the air and what they were doing on the air. This turned out to be a really key thing for the BBC that kept a monitoring station and contacted me about joining their monitoring force. I was 13 years old, 1973. I kind of blew them off and just without admitting that I was 13. And I went to the annual convention that year. And I was outed as being 13 at this convention. And the guys were all radio men from World War II in Korea, most of these guys. And they're embarrassed. They're embarrassed and had a lot of trepidation. But I stayed with them and became good friends with many of those guys. All right, moving on then to the next, what I'm about and how I got involved in prosecution. We'll go on to the next section, which is I bought eventually a radio. I couldn't afford one, a shortwave radio, until I'd done enough magic shows to pay for them. Yes, I said magic shows. My buddy and I were Nemo the Magnificent, me, and David King of Magic. I guess I had to kowtow to the king, but anyway. We made a lot of money that way, and I bought my first shortwave radio and started to listen to the world and care about it. Now, let's see, where does that lead me? Oh, yes. Well, it's, I didn't really box at all. I did in Boy Scouts. There was a martial arts activity. I was a Boy Scout. I would go every week or two and get my head pounded against the basement of linoleum floor basement of the Lutheran Church. We had our meetings there, and I was I'd probably be a lot smarter today if I hadn't gone to so many meetings. Having my head bounce against that stuff. But I learned that it was important to know who you are. That's kind of what I learned from Boy Scouts. I mean, it wasn't all bad, it wasn't all violence, but you had to hold your own. And I remember my mother was a single mother. I was the only single mother kid in the neighborhood, and had to do the Pinewood Derby. How many people know what that is? That's a curse on young men everywhere. And I tell you, stock up on Band-Aids before you start. Stock up on Band-Aids before you start that project. I've known so many kids that were traumatized by the Pinewood Derby because of the decorating job I had to do on mine, which I colored it with magic marker and maybe got a couple chips of wood off of it, and then I had to paint the racing stripe with. Anybody tell me what I paint with my racing stripe with? What did I use? Guess. Yes, nail polish. And you are just the kind of woman that causes this problem. No, you don't take it seriously, like the dads that worked at McDonnell Douglas in the neighborhood, and they put their thing through the wind tunnels at work. And just at the beginning of the advent of how do they call those things? Those things that fly in, people in them and blow up. Yeah. So that was the start of that. Anyway, we wanted to, let's see. I'm not the speaker I used to be, as you can imagine, by the way. I hope you can understand what I'm saying. It's very hard to do that. I'll slow down and try to, I used to be quite well heard when I was, slamming some killer home, where he belonged. But I'm a little bit at lost at times. But I also had a stroke, which was more recent, and you got to give some credit to the stroke, not to Parkinson's, okay? All right. I took a survey in my body. I think that stroking is about 20% and Parkinson's is about 80%. But they have their days, and some done better than the other. I'm still learning my words back. I don't have them all back. That is a stroke symptom that I had. And I try to do everything I can. The stroke is sort of scarier than the Parkinson's. Parkinson's is fairly gradual. You can keep an eye on it. You know what it's up to. But with the stroke, it may just sit there and just get mad at you, and you have a stroke. I've only had one stroke. I hope I never had another one. But you have to know who it is, what it is that's causing this in you. And I want to talk now very seriously about something that no one talks about really. And they're timid about doing this. I'm going to do it because I think it's really important. And that has to do with your medications. And I'm talking about your medications. Nobody really talks in this setting or indeed in the office setting in great detail about the meds that we take. And I think there's a lot of ignorance about that among patients. There's such a wide variety of prescribing being done, and a lot of it's bad prescribing. And I've become an expert by the hundreds, literally, hundreds of people that I know what I ought to basically, what they're taking. I don't tell them what to take, because I'm not a doctor, I'm a lawyer. I'm Dr. Laws, which doesn't help anyone in this case. But, this is a very important thing. So I want to tell you what the major drugs are, just as a review, because I think many of you may not know this. All right, so, you are being disturbed if you don't. Of course, the main drug that you need to know about is called Sinemet. Sinemet is a synthetic form of dopamine. Dopamine being an enzyme that drives your movements and keeps you comfortable and able to move, fluidly. The word Sinemet comes from what they were trying to invent it to be, which was a chemical that was injected into you in an emergency room if they didn't want you to throw up. Okay? You can take poisons, or a child can take a poison, and they may want that poison to come out by being thrown up, or they may want it to stay in and pump his stomach, okay, and get out that way. Sinemet was that chemical designed to make you not throw up. So this is one of the great products of America. It has an appealing name. Won't make you throw up, okay? That's what it is. That's what it stands for, Sinemet. Sin without, and met. A metin agent is one that causes you not to throw up. And that's what Sinemet was designed to do. But over time, Oliver Sacks, a doctor in England, and some other people figured out that it could cause you to restore balance in your enzymes. And not only that, it could be counterbalanced by something called carbidopa. So you levodopa and carbidopa, and the carbidopa balanced levodopa out and caused it not to break down so quite quickly. And a lot of stuff that you're taking is designed to follow up, and so that you don't waste the Sinemet that you're having. Okay, and Sinemet is an old trade name. There are other names for it. Carbidopa, levodopa is one that's a common generic name for it. Rytary is a trade name. Many of you are using it probably now. How many people are using Rytary instead of Sinemet? I thought it was a program on a couple of doctors in here, looking after tigers on the veld, and Rytary, yeah. But it wasn't that. It's a form of Sinemet that has less chemical in it, actually, than the standard dosage of Sinemet. Sinemet is at 125, what's the name? It's 120-200. I may be wrong on the lower number, but Rytary has less of each. And I'm not sure what the justification is. I think it has to do with not needing so much to get the desired effect. And that you would want to use less Sinemet because it will burn you out ultimately, the thought was, and still is to some degree. It can burn out and be less able to have uptake. and that's very important. And then there's also Duopa, which is a newer form of delivering Cinemat that's a pump that like what you might have with diabetes and so on. Those things you need to know about. That's Cinemat. And if you're young, you have to give some thought to how your youth and when you should start using Cinemat. Because it has a useful life of, it varies. It varies. You don't want to use it up. You want to use it to the full extent. However, I have found many cases, and it's really rare. It's not rare. I was talking to a guy who owns a deli by himself. And he was down there digging under his counter every few seconds to get something out to serve a sandwich. Up and down, up and down, up and down. He seemed to be in such pain. I noticed between scoops, he was shaking. I said, "Sir, how long have you had Parkinson's?" "About 12 years," he said. 12 years. I said, "How old are you?" "I'm 68 years old." "Okay, and what are you taking besides Cinemat, if I may ask?" I don't take Cinemat. I take something called propranolol. And propranolol is a blood pressure med that reduces, coincidentally, the occasion of tremor. It's very good that way. It's very cheap to buy it, but you don't use it as, I don't think that you not prescribe it, nobody does, as the centerpiece of your whole Parkinson's treatment, especially at the age of 67, the age of 67, 68, whatever. You don't have a choice at that point. You can, I think, and I'm not a doctor and I may be wrong, but I've seen so many people able to go to church and pick their grandson up and carry him into the pew or play miniature golf with him on one day because they started to take Cinemat in their 60s. There's no trade-off there. It's not going to kill you. It's not going to wear out when you're late 60s when you start. So that's the one thing I just give one piece of advice to everybody in the world that has Parkinson's. Take a close look and get a second opinion from a doctor about your dosage and the type of drugs you're taking. You may also be taking something called selegiline. Selegiline hydrochloride. I take that, all these things I'm telling you, I take them all. Okay? I take 25 pills a day. All right, I do, and I have taken them some period of time. And the fact that I'm in 24 years with Parkinson's is not wholly to me, but it is, it's something that I'm proud of, that I think is not just a bunch of prescription chemicals. There's a part of it that is important. You should do it, but you got to know what you're taking, and you got to be willing to stand up and talk about what your effects are, and understand. There are more drugs I can tell you about. I'm going to close out. Am I out of time already? I'm below the clock already. How much time do I have left to finish? God. 2 minutes?
At least
10 minutes. I'm sorry about this. I'm very long-winded. I used to get paid by the minute. So, now, however, some other things. There are other drugs that I can cite to you that, dopamine agonists. Dopamine agonists, there are 4 of them I know of that exist, and they are very useful. I take the most commonly taken one right now. Who knows the long name of what that is? The most popular dopamine agonist is what? Say what? There are no wrong answers. It's ropinirole. Requip. Okay, Requip is the most popular. And what a dopamine agonist does It just follows on the cinemet and imitates it. For like I can imitate Jimmy Stewart, you know, but I'm telling you, the cinnamon stuff. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Anyway, but you will take that as a nowadays state of the art med that a gerontologist may not be familiar with, but a movement disorder specialist may and should and would absolutely know about it. And this is one opportunity passed up to get something with good effects that doesn't burn out early, doesn't hurt your brain, and provide some extra oomph to that desired effect of the cinnamon itself. Okay, and the selegiline that I mentioned, it's not as powerful, but it helps douse the cells with antidepressant drugs, so similar to antidepressant effects, and that can be useful too. So these are some interactions you have to worry about. I won't tell you all they are, but anything that's called an MAOI inhibitor or a TMO something, those two are dangerous, possibly, unless you dose it right and deal with it. That having drugs interactions. You just need to talk to your doctor about that, like everything else I say to you. And then, let's see. And then you got to watch out. If you're like me, you've had a stroke, you got to think about interactions with blood thinners and things like that you may have to take. And those may be incompatible. So that is something that you never hear. I could go on and on about these drugs. I'm telling you, this is the stuff you got to know. If you're going to be an educated patient, you got to know there are too many people out there who are not being dosed properly because their own doctors are not trained properly and recently for dealing with that. Okay, so I've done nothing more for you than that today. I hope you've learned that a little bit from me.
Any questions?
I'm going to refer questions on that. I can probably shift it to regular questions now from you as well. Thank you. Okay, are there any questions? What's my next size? It's no. Go on.
Would you mind sharing your story with the development of Rocksteady Boxing?
Sure, yeah. I know people are tired of hearing that, but if they're not, or if they are, I'm going to deliver it. It started with a friendship I had with a guy named Vincent Perez, who was a cop in Omaha, who went back to school for his law education and moved to Indianapolis. I met him in a meeting with some poobahs of the Republican Party who were negotiating with Vince's client about work they wanted to get from the state. And we were just kind of looking at each other, rolling our eyes at the way the conversation was going, not particularly well. So he left and I left behind him, went down the stairs of the GOP headquarters and talked all the way back to City County Building. We arranged to meet for drinks, and he never called me for like 6 months. And then something must have come over him, I don't know what. And he just called me and we got together for drinks 6 months later. At that rate, we'd be on our first class 2 by now in building Rocksteady Boxing. But we got started big time, and one of the people that was really involved was Paula Tomlin. Paula, will you stand up? Just, I want to give her a round of applause. She and I were like, believe it or not, we're like the brain trust of this we tried to read through this stuff and learn how the results I was getting from just exercising very strenuously, how it could be replicated, or if it was a lucky thing. And she found similar results have lasted her 24 years about, right? 24 years, Paula? 22, okay. So I still get her. But anyway, but she helped save this organization more than once, and she took me with her to Cleveland Clinic, where they were experimenting there with stationary bicycles. And they were having results, but they weren't as good as results as ours. And there's a reason for that, I believe. But we were there listening to this lecture, and the guy starts describing the experiments they do with these bicycles. And he said, we found that if we update the level of strenuousness, people did better, even though they were very tired. That's what he said. And they were doing better. And I turned to Paula and said down in the corner of my mouth, just what was our major slogan at that time. A little too much is just enough. That was our slogan we coined at Rock City Boxing based on our understanding of how this would work. And that's how it started. From there we came back. I took over a gym that was not being used by a friend of mine. We had a TPA, claims paying organization for health care. And I knew his people were not ever going to work out for anything. There were just too many cigarettes dangling from their hands to get them. And you'd walk around there, such a bummer that people were so negative, and they had free reign for when they wanted to collect the stuff. They were like, yeah, well, I think you're a deadbeat, I think you're just a deadbeat, that's what they say. And we hear that around, but we were deadbeats. We went in that gym, and we started with 10 people from Young Parkinson's of Indiana, which was a support group I founded for the sole purpose of doing nothing. But at least getting 10 people together to have a beer, that's all. And if anybody raised anything of substance, they would be given a tennis shoe whooping. If you don't know what that is, ask someone on the streets of Indianapolis. But so we use that for recruiting people to Rock City Boxing. We put them up in the ring, and the first class we had was on October this time of year, 2005, I believe. Am I right? 2006. Time flies. Anyway, 2006, we had our first class. And I remember the first exercise we had to do was this crossover stretching thing. Let's see. I'm not going to try to do it. I can't really do it. But just this thing. And you bend down and you reach your toes. And all 4 of them, all 11 of them by then, fell on the ground, just about like bowling pins. Looked like a bunch of bowling pins, but it grew very quickly. 6 months later, I think we had 60 members and not enough space. And I knew this was going to happen. I had a vision of this organization, really did. There are many things I have a vision of that, instead of McDonald's, I envisioned something called House of Toast. But, I'm not that wise in these things. But this one, I did have a vision, and it worked. And nothing could stop us. And that's pretty much where it stood from there. We had this Leslie Stahl report that came over the news, and it changed everything. I happen to think that Leslie Stahl report was one of the less complete and accurate stories I've heard. I liked many of the stories better than hers, but she brought them in. And our whole system went down when she turned that deep. And just growing up from there, people calling me from my my desk. Hello, I would like to talk to somebody about varsity boxing. I said, yes. He says, where in Reykjavik is my varsity boxing locations? I said, there aren't any Reykjavik, Iceland locations, sir. But if you're interested, I'll send you a brochure. That happens every day. And I think we have one or had one in Reykjavik. In Norway, I know, Norway's very active. So anyway, then one of them, Croatia, I believe it is, has a ship where they do exercises on. And those people are thinking, okay, they're thinking. Any other questions? The next chapter is to still be written. We've regained our size, and I would say most of our strength. Kind of like me, we're setting size and strength again. Going back post-COVID, sort of post-COVID. I had my shots this week, by the way. You should too. I mean, even if you don't believe in them, it's kind of hard to believe when you have a vaccine every few days. I thought it was like saying the car should only be driven backwards. I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me, but I'd rather take it than not take it. So I did that, but so that's going on. And I just want to close. I'll take one more question first of all. Any questions? Yes. Oh, okay.
There was an outstanding article by Greg Doyle that was online in the Indy Star on Thursday. It did not appear in the paper on Friday. Do you know when that's going to actually be printed? It is an incredible story.
When I'm done smoothing it out and getting the words right. No, just kidding. Just kidding. No, it's due out Monday to Sunday this week. It'll be in the Sunday paper.
Pick up Sundays.
You can see it today online. It's online, right? Readily open, and you don't have to have a membership in Indy Star to see that. But it will be in a paper form if any left are left when I'm done gathering them up.
Editorial comment, Rocksteady is beyond an exercise regiment or just a group of Parkinson's people getting together. It is beyond a community. It is beyond even what you get spiritually in support from church. This is family, and it is people walking together, and in my personal opinion, you are one of the greatest innovators of the 21st century, sir. You are bringing peace through the world, and you are uniting people in a way that no one would wish they had Parkinson's. But this is the most precious gift anyone associated with Parkinson's could ever hope to have, and it is all because of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know what to say, but other than I promise never to run again for office. And that's a return gift for you. Okay?
Thank you for Speaker of the House. Be careful.
They won't vote for me either, believe me. Okay. Thank you for that. I mean, it's beyond anything I can acknowledge in words, but thank you. Just keep it up and love it and love each other, you know.